Welcome and thank you all for joining us tonight for Third Decade's annual Alumni Week kickoff. This week is planned each year with you all in mind, and this is a chance for us to connect, learn, and celebrate together. So we've scheduled 3 days of workshops for topics most relevant to our community, and we're really excited for the first one with you all tonight, career growth and change, knowing when to upskill or pivot. So tonight, we are joined by Katie Kalagi. She is the founder of Katie Kalagi Consulting and brings over 15 years of executive leadership experience across boutique, mid-sized, and large advisory firms. And she's known for helping organizations and individuals reach their next stage of growth by aligning people strategy with purpose, evolving firm operations, and empowering the next generation of leaders. Katie joins us this evening to share her expertise and discuss career growth and change, why you should invest in your future self, and how to be intentional with every step along the way. So at the end of tonight's webinar, we will have some time set aside to address questions from the Q&A, so please be sure to share your questions there for a chance to have them addressed live at the end. And we hope you all get a lot out of tonight's session. So welcome, Katie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Nikita. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you guys so much for having me. Appreciate the great introduction. So Nikita shared a lot about my professional background. One thing I'll add is that I have actually gone through quite a few career pivots myself. I was a biochemistry major in college, ended up in the finance industry, and now I'm running my own firm. So I know what it's like to pivot at various times in my career. On the personal side, I am from Marin County, California. That's kind of where home was raised there, spent most of my life up in San Rafael, just north of San Francisco. But I am currently living out in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. We relocated here about 6 years ago. I have three boys, 17, 14, and 2. So I'm raising teenagers and toddlers. So it's quite a exciting time right now. But as Nikita mentioned, I have just really found that my passion has always been in developing individuals and teams. And so that's really where my career has been focused. So super excited to talk to you guys about this topic tonight, and excited for the Q&A at the end, as Nikita mentioned. So for tonight, kind of the key takeaways that I'm hoping that we can cover is one, just to talk about some principles that will position you for both growth and flexibility, how to be intentional about your career growth. Career growth is always important, whether you kind of stay in one area or you pivot. So we'll talk a little bit about that. How to decide when it's time to pivot, some things that you can look for that can be good indicators of when to pivot, and then some important factors to consider before you make a change. Um, Thought I'd just talk a little bit first about kind of what the changing career landscape looks like for most of you. So, I think some things that are kind of relevant to this discussion are that one, millennials and Gen Z are making and have made a lot more career changes than Gen X and boomers. I think boomers are getting a little bit more used to this. There was definitely a period of time where it was like they were kind of used to you had a career your whole life, and that just hasn't been the case. So, there's a lot of room to try new things and move around, and that's becoming much more common. I think one thing I'm super excited about is that, hybrid and remote work has really changed job opportunities. Before, whether it was a pivot or a growth move, you were generally limited to your geographic area unless you wanted to relocate, and that's just not the case now. So that's pretty interesting in terms of opportunities. Social media and technology also have really opened up, made things easier for freelance and business ownership, making it just more accessible and diverse, whether it's a side gig or a full time gig. I can say, as a consultant owning my own business, the technology that's available and accessible and affordable has made a big difference in me being able to launch into this career pivot. And then, AI, I can't, have a presentation without mentioning it. It's, lots of people are talking about it. Of course, there's a lot around the career risks that we're all wondering and curious about what will happen. But I'm also hearing a lot and personally just think that there's also going to be opportunities. And I know that I'm getting a lot more requests for in person team meetings and team building events because I think people are really craving connection. So I think jobs that foster human interaction and connection, there will likely be a lot of new opportunities with AI. in addition to maybe some of the changes and risks that it'll bring. So when we think about growth and flexibility, some key things came to mind for me. So for this group, it's easy to start with having a financial plan. So at the start of your career, mid-career, wherever you are in your career journey, having a financial plan is so important because it helps you be intentional and smart with your earnings, which is what all of you are doing by being a part of this. It's what's wonderful about third decade even being available to folks. But your financial plan is a big factor in where you take your career and your flexibility to move around. So glad all of you are paying very close attention to that.
Katie, I just
Um,
wanted to interject really
yeah,
quick.
yeah.
Do you want to share a slide deck here?
Oh gosh, is it not sharing anymore?
Not yet.
Oh
No,
gosh.
that's okay. I'm so sorry. I wasn't sure if you wanted a little bit of time, but we'll go ahead and take off from there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, here, I'll just go back and show you my three boys there because that was the highlight so far. Thank you, Nikita, for letting me know.
Of course.
Um, okay, so yeah. So having a financial plan. So the next thing is really having an ownership mentality around your development. Um, Companies, managers, they're all going to be a little different in terms of how good they are at helping you lay out your career path. So having that ownership mentality yourself will be really important. Um, Mastering your transferable skills. So every job will have certain technical skills that you have to get good at to, further your career in that particular spot. But pay attention to the transferable skills as well. And I highlight some key ones here. So things like relationship building. No matter what career you're in, your ability to build trust and influence others and build rapport is going to be super important for your growth. Critical thinking, people are always looking for people that can, take a problem and see different angles and, craft good messages to their audience or their clients. And I would say on here, one thing I would caution with is AI. Be careful here because I think AI can be an easy place to go to do some of our thinking for us, but critical thinking is a really important transferable skill. And then same with problem solving, and then having a positive mindset, being able to come into whatever situation you are in your career and look at possibilities, opportunities, and be that person that can really generate more positivity on the team, and not bring, drama or kind of bring folks down. So those are, I think, the really transferable skills that are super important to always be focusing on as you're building your technical skills. The other thing is to just always focus more on being curious over being confident. So it's not to say that confidence isn't important, but I think having that mindset of that learning and growth oriented approach where you're always looking at what more can I learn here? How can I incorporate other viewpoints into this recommendation that I'm making? Just maintaining that curiosity that will actually build your inner confidence. And I think focusing there will get you a lot further than worrying about how confident you appear to others. I know that when I'm coaching senior executives, they always love the folks that are curious and have that learning mindset. And then don't forget to be really mindful about building resilience because as much as we want to plan and be intentional, there's so much outside of our control, and a lot of things that will happen that we would never have predicted, whether they're opportunities or setbacks. And so, our ability to make really good, clear decisions is really related to how well we're also taking care of ourselves. So, along the way, make sure you're taking care of your physical health, your mental and emotional, that will position you better in your job, but it'll also make you a lot more adaptable when kind of the unexpected setbacks happen and also when opportunities arise and you need to make a big decision. So, when I talk about owning your development, this is really about investing in your future self. And so I think it's important for a couple key reasons. One is that just empowerment of, again, we're not in control of a lot of the things that are going to happen. We can't guarantee, even if we're ready, if promotions will be available or opportunities will be there, but we can control the skills we build and the relationships that we create. And that makes us feel a little bit more empowered and have some agency over our choices as we move through our career. Um, Owning your development also helps you build that inner confidence again. You're really taking steps to improve in your capabilities, and that's going to make you feel more ready and confident in as you're looking at the next stage in your career. And then again, just building that resilience so that whatever happens, you can recover and adapt and bounce back pretty strong. So some steps you can take to kind of build that, take ownership over your career, setting clear growth goals and tracking your progress. So again, whether or not you have a formal process in your current job to do this, you can always do this on your own or in parallel. But make a discipline every year, every 6 months to just sit down and think about your goals and then track your progress. I'll often have my coaching clients, every quarter or 6 months, I'll have them kind of go back and make a list of what are some of your best achievements, things that you're proud of, what capabilities did you have to use to do that, what new skills did you acquire when you did that. When we go to make a pivot and we have to sit down and write a resume, which is the most dreadful part of any change in our career, it's hard to remember those things. So tracking your progress along the way can be helpful. And it can also help you when you're, sitting down to go through your review and talking about promotions in the next stage in your career. Always be actively seeking out learning opportunities. Again, if it's not something that's being readily volunteered to you, don't be shy to look outside and find things that you can either invest in yourself or maybe ask of your employer. Always be soliciting feedback and looking for ways to be challenged. And then again, just take responsibility for building the skills and experience that you know you need to succeed. So some final principles on kind of your development that I have just found show up consistently. One is know that you have more control than you think. I've worked with a lot of early career folks that are really looking for a lot of direction or clarity around their career path. Again, some companies are great at providing that, others are not. And if they're not as great, know that you can actually control more than you think in that arena in terms of seeking out learning opportunities and challenges for yourself. Another thing I think is really important is that a lot goes unrecognized, both on the positive side and on the negative side. People just aren't great at giving feedback, even when it's celebratory. People are busy; things get lost in the shuffle. So your leaders aren't always going to be great about recognizing things, but I have found that very little goes unnoticed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then just think about your career as a lab. This is wherever stage you're in, even if it's feeling like, I don't know if I love this, or it's feeling a little off or unclear. Know that every stage is an opportunity to experiment and learn. So really sink into that and take the chapter you're in to kind of harvest what can I learn and experiment with here that can help me with the long term. And that would be the last thing of just, play the long game, be thinking about, steps you take now, how that's going to really impact your future self. How can you set yourself up for success? And again, know that there could be some short term periods where things are a little unclear or maybe not great. Even our not so fun jobs or not so great bosses can be huge learning opportunities. So remember that, that bigger picture, that longer term journey that you're on. So some steps in terms of building your own career path that I think are important to take. Again, kind of step back and think about your personal vision and kind of create a map of your goals and vision. So, what do you envision for your lifestyle? What types of environments do you like to be in? What types of people do you want to work with? Do you have a picture of where you want to get to in your career, or do you need to try a few things out to figure out what that looks like? So just doing that on your own, again, making that a ritual that you do, at least once a year, a couple times a year can be super helpful. Get really clear in your current job on the performance and outcomes and expectations. So it's really important to know how is your success being measured by your current stakeholders. Job descriptions can be very broad. They have a lot of things in them. Sometimes there's things that we get more excited about that we'll naturally gravitate to, but there might be things that your stakeholders are looking for that are really important, and that's actually how they're measuring your success. So if you don't have clarity there, talk to your manager, talk to your stakeholders, and just get clear on like what does success look like to you? What's most important? And make sure you're focusing there. If there's other things that you want to learn or be leaning into that speak to other interests, you can find time for that, but just make sure that you're really covering those because that's how they're going to be looking at your career progression. Always be setting learning goals, both technical and leadership, or those transferable skills. Kind of identify where are your gaps currently and what do you need to maybe get to that next level, and set some goals in terms of learning. And then I will say that of all the pivots and disruptions and setbacks and opportunities I've experienced in my career, the one thing that by far that has been most important has been the relationships and network I've had. So make sure you're building that into your overall career time and goals, which is to go out and make connections and not just networking from a list of names or a number of people on LinkedIn, but really true relationships where you're finding opportunities to share and help others. Because I guarantee you there will be a time where you'll need to get help from others and they'll be there for you and can really make those changes in your career go a lot smoother. So finding peers, reaching out and finding mentors, joining industry study groups if that's something available, and then engaging coaches and experts as well. I think I'm super passionate about coaching because I had my first coach almost 2 decades ago, and I've worked with them for most of my career. And I have found that to be just super, super helpful in terms of elevating my leadership skills. And then the last thing is just to make sure you're always really developing strong self awareness. Again, leaders don't love to give feedback. I mean, you would be shocked at how many of my like C suite executives I'm coaching that still come to me with, I have to give feedback and I don't want to. Everybody gets nervous about it. So, take that initiative and you can always solicit and ask for feedback. And then, when you ask for feedback, remember that what you're learning in feedback is what is effective for your stakeholders. So, whether that's your manager or a decision maker on your team, we tend to get nervous about feedback or shy away from it because it just feels really personal. But it's actually just telling you, is the what you're doing working for that person? And if not, it can give you some ideas of how you might revise your approach to be effective. So, kind of taking that personalization off of it can help it be a much richer learning experience and make it more comfortable for you to seek it out over time. So I talked a little bit about a lot goes unrecognized, but very little goes unnoticed. So when I'm talking to leaders, the things that really stand out in the people that they tend to advance in the organization, um, I would say humility is always number one. So, again, a lot of times we're kind of taught like, hey, we need to go into our role and be very confident and tell people what we know and share our expertise. And of course, there's, a time and a place for that. But the folks that are humble, that are willing to roll up their sleeves and help out, that have that can do attitude, that are the ones that are like, that's, that aren't saying that's your job and this is my job, but really a team player. Those folks are always getting noticed. Again, even if it's not called out, those tend to be the people that leaders really always call out and notice. Kind and collaborative, it seems pretty basic, but people that treat their coworkers with respect, regardless of their position in the organization, that are respectful to talk to, that aren't creating drama and gossip in the organization, and are super collaborative, definitely stand out as well. Reliability is huge. The folks that when I'll hear my executives say, if I give that person that, I know it's coming back, or I handed that off and I have total confidence that they'll follow through. Reliability is a big thing that people are looking for and what advances folks in their role. And then just having that proactivity, anticipating what the client might need or anticipating what might happen, raising your hand to take on a project, just being really proactive in the workplace. And kind of along with that, it's just the folks that are willing to go the extra mile. The qualities that stall, kind of on the opposite side of this, again, being overconfident, so too focused on how you look or appear, or sounding like an expert versus having more of that learning mindset. Um, Self-focused or disrespectful, so I will tell you that even like my founders that own businesses at the top, if they hear I'm in the RAA world, so if an advisor were to talk down to a client service person or a trader, that definitely gets noticed and is very, very frowned upon. Generally, if you're working in the right place. um, and then any inconsistencies. So you can like kill it on something, but if that kind of reliability wanes, that can tend to be a flag of concern for folks. Waiting for direction. Of course, there's certain things where you have to have the right instructions for. But if there's any small step you can take or a question you can ask to move things forward, people really love seeing that. And then unprofessional, that's a big bucket. I will tell you the two things that are coming up a lot are timeliness. So there seems to be a little bit more lackadaisical around start time, kind of coming in at one time, coming in late, not thinking it's a big deal. So that's definitely getting noticed. Being on phones and being distracted. I've actually this year have had more leaders talking to me about how do I give feedback, to an employee that I just noticed is kind of on their phone a lot and they're missing some deadlines. So, just how you write emails, be careful with, emojis and, short form things. So those kind of professional details, again, they really do matter and they do get noticed. And then, like I said, just really thinking of the long game, enjoy the journey, trust the mystery. It's okay to not always know what's next. Especially with high achieving folks, it's like we're always kind of worried about what's that next level, or am I in the right spot, or is this serving my career? And those are good questions to ask, but sometimes we just don't know what's coming. And again, we just have to sort of sink into what can I learn and experiment here. Getting wise about rejection, whether it's a rejection of an idea or a project or a job, um, first and foremost, just shaking it off and keep going. I think you'll find over time that most rejection is really, keeping us from something that's not aligned with us, and it's opening up the path for something better. If it's a pattern, seek some feedback and don't be shy to ask, hey, what am I doing here that's not effective that maybe I need to revise? But try not to personalize it and shake it off so you can keep moving forward. And then, like I said, just experiment, learn, and just always be yourself and be authentic. You're going to get a lot further being you than trying to be somebody else. So, some thoughts on how to decide when to pivot. So kind of thinking about, okay, we're being intentional about the growth of our career, but what if we want to change or make a pivot? Um, so, one thing you can start to look for is, do you notice a lack of energy or certainly a belief in your current path? So, if you don't have conviction behind what you're doing, that's a really clear indicator that you probably want to start exploring some other routes because no matter what you do, you have to believe in it on some level. It doesn't have to be your only purpose, it doesn't have to be your only passion, but you really have to believe in it. My father, when he came out of college back in the 80s, he was a finance major. When you went into finance, you became a stockbroker in the 80s. That was just what you did. But he found, pretty early on that what he loved about his work was interacting with his clients and helping them think about their long-term goals and finding ways to get them there. He didn't really like just taking orders and buying the stocks that they wanted. And so, he had to make a pretty big pivot because he just didn't believe in that path. So make sure you have conviction behind what you're doing. Also, just check your energy. When I started in the RIA field, I was an advisor first. I worked with clients, really enjoyed that, but I noticed that what got me energized about it was listening to their story, reflecting back what they were looking for, and helping them achieve their goals. But the technical side of it, the finance piece, wasn't really lighting me up. When I would go to conferences and we would talk about team development and leadership, I got super excited. I remember looking at my bookshelf and I'm like, so I have about two books on investing and like 10 on leadership. So, like, that was kind of an indication of like, where's my energy going? So, just pay attention to your energy, and that can be a good indicator. Also, there could be just a mismatch of skills or strengths. So, I actually had a coaching client this morning that was talking to me about a gentleman who, has wanted to be an advisor. He's been an advisor for a couple years, but he just does not connect with clients in a natural way. He's a very analytical, kind of behind the scenes guy. So they've coached him and they've given him all this training, and it's just not working. And that's because they're probably not playing to his strengths. They just need to find the right seat on the bus for him to be successful. So, make sure that if you feel like you're just not clicking with something, take a step back and say, what are my strengths? And really, really emphasize building your strengths as opposed to trying to fix or change a weakness. That just has a much lower likelihood of success. So sometimes you might just need to switch seats to better play to your strengths. Um, Occasionally, there could be an unexpected change. It could be a disruption. A company could go through a layoff. Maybe the economy is in a different place that could force a pivot, or there could be a unique opportunity. I started in biomedical science. I went to, I had a biology degree. I worked in biopharma for the first part of my career, and then my dad had this opportunity at his firm, and it kind of worked with my lifestyle, and it sounded intriguing, and so I made a pivot into financial services. So sometimes it'll just be an unexpected change that can prompt a pivot. And then, I'd say the last thing to really look for is at different points in your career journey, you're going to notice just a natural evolution or outgrowing of what you're doing. And that can be a really good clue to kind of get curious and introspective around that. For me, I was in a corporate career for many years, kind of on executive teams of companies. And I just noticed that I wanted to get back to working one on one with people, to working with small businesses. And I had just kind of outgrown and evolved from that chapter in my career. So that's another indication that it might be time to pivot. And so, factors to consider, be really clear on your why. Are you running away from something? You running towards something? How does this align with your personal values and your long term plan? Make sure you do have good financial and lifestyle readiness. Sometimes pivots again are forced. We can't, we're not prepared, and we can make it through that. But if you're being intentional about it, is always good to make sure that this works for your lifestyle and that you can afford it at this time. Take stock of those transferable skills and strengths. This is where working with a coach or a mentor or peer can be really, really helpful. Sometimes it takes other people reflecting back what we're strong at to help us get clear on the breadth of that. And a lot of times we might look like if we're pivoting into a job and there's a job requirement or a skill, we might think that we don't have it. But actually, if we look at what we've done in our job, there could very well be a skill that's really transferable to that. So oftentimes you probably have more than you think you do. And then really, again, do not be shy with your network and support system. Start asking questions, doing research, poking around, getting ideas. Our network and the relationships we've had can be really, really useful and provide us a lot of wisdom. And then remember that if you do decide to make a pivot, and it can be a career growth move where you're moving into a promotion in the same path, or it could be a pivot. Um, I train on change and transition with a lot of firms, especially because in our world, there's a ton of change and transition happening with M&A and everything else. And kind of the punchline of that is that change is situational. It's an event that happens. But transition is a process, and it's the emotional and psychological process of us adapting to the change. So, think about and kind of learn around like what are the steps that you go through emotionally and psychologically so that as you're going through that pivot or that change, you're not rocked by a lot of the emotions that are very, very normal to have when you're adapting to something new. So things like confusion or fear will come up. It's also a time for a lot of creativity. So just having an awareness that there will be an adjustment period for you can make that pivot feel a little bit smoother. So that concludes kind of the presentation. So I'd love to open it up for Q&A.
All right, so we've had some really great questions come in. I'm going to go ahead and just go through them. And if others who haven't submitted something yet still have something to ask, feel free to use the Q&A to do so. But we'll start with, how do you determine if you really want to pivot into something new versus thinking the grass is greener on the other side and or burnout? For example, I work in tech and I'm interested in pursuing more value or mission-oriented work, but I have friends who are working in nonprofits or as teachers that want to leave.
Mm-hmm. Great question. Yeah, so I think that goes to, making sure that you're taking care of yourself, that resilience. So, We are not going to make great decisions if we are feeling burnt out, if our nervous systems are dysregulated, and we're just, totally stressed. So you want to, I think, get yourself back to kind of neutral a little bit if you can, in terms of burnout and scaling back, so that you can really get clear on that why around what's coming up for you. And you can have meaningful discussions around going back to what are my core values? What are the things about my job that I thrive in? One of the things I help my um, folks in my group coaching program, one thing we do is identify our core nutrients, the things that really help us thrive, the conditions. So reconnect with those, and then you can assess: Am I getting enough of those in this current job, or do I need to pivot to get more of those? I think, and I'll just make the last point that setting the right expectations. I think the grass is greener is a good call out, in the sense of, you know, always expect that every workplace is going to have some level of drama or dysfunction. We're all working too much. It's kind of systemic. Burnout is happening everywhere. So there's a lot of things we need to do to take agency over that. So yeah, having those realistic expectations that, you're not going to run away and find this great nirvana of an experience. But if you can kind of come back to center and then really go through some thoughtful questions, that can help you.
Great, thank you.
Hmm.
We also have, how do you pivot with confidence, especially if you're used to doing a specific type of work, for example, pivoting from the nonprofit sector to a more corporate role?
Yeah, so I would say, whenever you're stepping into something bigger or newer, you're never going to be fully ready for it. So it's okay to move forward if you're not totally confident. And in fact, that's probably a good indication that you're leaning into something that's going to be a great learning and growth opportunity for you. So don't put too much pressure on yourself to feel confident. I think feel confident in your resilience, confident in your adaptability, your ability to learn, and try new things. And, those transferable skills that you take stock of, like I know how to build relationships, or I'm a strong writer, whatever you've used in your past. And I think, most importantly, like I said, like look back to other times where you stepped into something bigger and you weren't ready. And how did you manage that? You had the skills and abilities to adapt to that. So long way of saying you don't need all of the confidence to make the pivot. Some of it comes with actually doing it.
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it.
Mhm.
Do you have any advice for someone who wants to start something on their own but doesn't necessarily have the funds to quit their day job to do so?
Yeah, so I will tell you, as a business owner, it is not for the faint of heart. Starting your own business, and I'm a breadwinner, I should say. So I've got 3 kids. I'm a breadwinner, so it's a life stage thing too. So it is risky, but it's doable. So I do think that you want to be smart about it. I would caution you with, there's a lot of glittery stuff and a lot of influencers out there that will tell you to drop everything and follow your dreams and it's all going to work out okay. Sure, like I totally agree you should follow your passions. But part of third decade is, let's also be intentional and methodical about how we do that, and make sure, again, thinking about that long game, how you protect against risks, set yourself up for success. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to be, methodical about it. And, there's ways to do that. And again, I think, side gigs can be great. Volunteering in a different area, trying something out first. There's ways to experiment and dip your feet in before you make that big leap. And I would say definitely have a good financial plan before making that leap.
Yep. How do you share the personal and professional growth steps that you've taken outside of an annual review with your supervisor?
So you mean,
I think they're saying, like, how would you share about personal professional growth that you've done apart from like your annual review where you get to sit down and share those things with your supervisor? How can you do that outside of those planned instances of it?
Yeah, so I think if it's finding other ways to enhance your performance review, that's kind of coming back to owning your development and, seeking other ways that you can augment that. But if it's about highlighting other stuff you've done, I think put it on your review. If you can tie it to, so getting back to those success or performance outcomes. If you're clear on what your leaders are measuring your success on what is the most valuable and impactful for the position you're in, and you can take something you're doing outside and apply it to that, they would love to hear about that. So, for example, and again, I'm just speaking from my world, but advisors, as an advisor, you need to learn to build trust and rapport. If you're on a board or in a nonprofit and you're working with groups of people and you've built a lot of relationship building skills there, or you're going to networking events and anything that's transferable, I would definitely highlight it and talk about it.
Great.
Yeah.
How can you advocate for investing in your future self when there are organizational issues limiting your growth at your current job? Would that be a time to pivot?
Yeah, so I think I would pay very close attention to that, right? In terms of what are the real constraints or limitations that maybe are coming up for you in your current job. Just I think if you've got a sense of like, where am I going next, or what am I capable of, or am I ready to move into something? If you're not seeing that path at your current organization, definitely start looking for it somewhere else. So starting to have some conversations, reaching out again to your network. You can always be exploratory for a period of time. And I think you'll just know that, if you've hung in there and you've been a team player, but the organization just isn't ready for what your next step is, then that could be definitely a time to make a pivot.
All right. Another one we have is, how do you navigate a tolerable level of dysfunction in a workplace? Unrealistic expectations are an express route to burnout. When do you just self-care and when do you run?
Okay, so I will say you run when the dysfunction has entered toxicity. So I think so anytime you're working with humans working together is hard. This is why I have a job, really, because it's just difficult as human beings. And so collaborating, communication, getting different skill sets to work together is challenging. So there's always going to be some level of things feeling harder or being, quote, dysfunctional. Where it crosses the line is when it becomes toxic. So if there are people that are speaking inappropriately, that are verbally abusive, that are, really setting up unrealistic expectations. Any of those behaviors, you kind of know what toxic behaviors are. I would say that's not a place that you want to build a future in. And those things don't typically change, certainly not in a short period of time. For more of your kind of run of the mill dysfunction, if you will, with teens, I think one, do you align with the company's overall core values and mission? Do you have good people there rooting for you that are supporting you? If some of those bigger boxes are checked, can actually learn a lot with dysfunction. Sometimes we learn about the type of leader we want to be by working with a not so great leader. We learn about what didn't work when teamwork broke down. That can actually be really valuable learning lessons. But I think to my earlier question, if it's going on for a while and it's really stalling your ability to challenge yourself and move forward, then it may be time to move on.
Great. Thanks for addressing that.
Yeah.
And still have just a few more.
Yeah.
Would you recommend a career pivot in this current economy? Is there truth behind the claim that new employees are vulnerable to layoffs?
Hmm. I kind of think of that a little bit like how we think about the markets. There's just so little that we can predict in terms of forecasting what'll happen. I think that, whenever you're making a career move, whether it's switching jobs in your current path or pivoting, you always want to apply a level of diligence, looking into the company, understanding, how they're doing financially or their long-term plans. Are they a startup and more vulnerable to risk, or are they a pretty sturdy company? Researching the people you're going to work with. So, apply the right amount of due diligence. I think it's really hard to forecast otherwise. And I would be, I think, more hesitant to say that you stay somewhere or kind of freeze out of fear of the unknown. I think action tends to be a better antidote to anxiety. So see if you can maybe learn some more, do some diligence, and make a calculated decision.
Yeah. I know that's one that I've heard even friends express. I think it's a very common concern right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have any tips for somebody who currently works full-time and is considering going back to school to pivot into a different field within the next year?
Yeah, again, I think that's so I would say, in terms of though going back to school, make sure that you're really clear on your why. And is that necessary for the role you're going into? So I will just say that, and sometimes it is. Education is great, but sometimes education can be a bit of a hiding strategy where we, do more to get ourselves qualified or ready for something when we might actually already be more qualified than we think. So because going back to school is such a big financial decision, again, make sure that that works financially for you, that whatever you're going back into is, going to help you in terms of earnings in your career. But then also just ask yourself, do I really need this, or do I have enough to move forward? Um, and can I either pace this out or delay it or maybe not do it at all? So I would factor those things in.
Yeah. All right, last one we'll do
Yeah.
tonight. You sort of touched on this with pivoting with confidence, but do you have any experience or advice with how to navigate imposter syndrome when considering upskilling or pivoting? I feel like I'm in a place in my job where I should be ready to upskill, but I have a hard time trying to remind myself that I am capable and qualified enough to actually go for that next step.
Yeah, I mean, imposter syndrome's real. We all face it at various times in our career. On one hand, it can keep us humble, but it can also be very paralyzing. So I think, going back to that question around confidence, um, know that whenever you're going to step into something bigger, you're never going to feel ready or qualified. And that's okay because whatever you're stepping into, that journey on that path is what's going to actually get you qualified. So we're usually not qualified at the start when we're taking a step. So, I think it's this balance between, do you have what you need to be successful? Is there enough readiness where you're going to set yourself up for success, but not that you need to be at an expert level? And then I would just say that, everyone around you has had imposter syndrome at some point. It is a very universal experience. Even the people that seem the most qualified or most confident have dealt with that. I mean, I've been shocked by some of the people I've coached and met where I'm like, these are like brilliant people that have done all this stuff and they have imposter syndrome. So know that that's a shared experience. Learn how to get comfortable with it, how to work with it. But definitely, don't let it hold you back.
All right. So, Katie, how do people find you? How can they contact you?
Oh, thanks. Yes. So I would love to stay in touch. So, definitely ping me on LinkedIn. I run a group coaching program for early to mid career folks called the Coaching Forum. And in the spirit of good financial planning and decisions, I have a third decade discount. If any of you guys would like to sign up, I've offered a 50% discount to do that. It's a monthly membership. Or you can find me on my website, katiekalagi.com. But yeah, would love to stay in touch. And again, kudos to all of you for being involved in decade, being so thoughtful and intentional with your financial planning, but also clearly your career and life planning too. So it's great to see.
Thank you so much, Katie, for being here with us tonight and sharing your time and your expertise. I know I got a lot out of it. I'm sure our participants got a lot out of it. So I really appreciate you sharing with us tonight on this
Yeah.
topic.
Oh, I so love being here. Thank you guys for having me and best of luck to everyone.
Thank you. And for anyone else still on with us, I just want to let you know that if you registered for this webinar, you will be getting a recording um, after the fact. And we also have 2 more webinars this week. The second one is tomorrow. It is on financial activism, spending, banking, and investing with purpose. And day 3 on Wednesday will be on combining finances and how to navigate money as a team. And if you are in Phoenix, perhaps you'll join us for our in-person happy hour on Thursday. There should have been an email with an RSVP link out for that. But thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you at tomorrow night's webinar. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much, Nikita. Have a
Bye-bye.
great night.